The echo of the auctioneer's voice ricocheted through the iron rafters, blending with the restless shuffle of boots and the low, anxious snorts of horses. Wyatt St. James, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that looked out of place among denim and dust, stood alone at the back of the old barn. His jaw set, expression fixed and distant. He might have been mistaken for a man inspecting investment properties rather than living, breathing animals, and for the most part, that's how he felt. Disconnected, untouched. The sharp aroma of hay mingled with the scent of rain on distant earth. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the open barn doors. Wyatt's hands, calloused from old habit rather than necessity, stayed clenched in his pockets, his gaze coldly indifferent as one horse after another paraded before the crowd. He'd promised himself this was just business, a chance to expand his ranch's bloodlines, to show up and write a check, nothing more. But as the auction wore on, his mind drifted, dragged backward against his will, toward the memory that haunted his nights. The frantic whinny of a horse he couldn't save, the sound of a barn burning, the white-hot brand of guilt that never seemed to fade. The crowd murmured as a thin, battered mare was led out last. She was smaller than the others, chestnut coat dulled and matted, ribs pressing like knuckles through her hide. She didn't meet anyone's eyes. Wyatt almost looked away, but something, a glint in the low light maybe, or the soft tremor in the air, held him. A young boy at her side wiped at her face, but the gesture wasn't what caught him. It was a single, silent tear tracking down the mare's muzzle, shining in the auction barn's harsh light. Wyatt's heart stuttered. For a moment, he was 12 again, boots too big, hands pressed uselessly against a locked stable door. His father's voice cold and final, "There's nothing you can do, son." He blinked, throat tight, the room around him shrinking until all he could see was the broken horse before him. "Lot 47, final animal," called the auctioneer, almost bored. "Mare, Mustang type, unbroken, health not guaranteed. Start at $50. Do I hear 50? A silence fell. No one raised a hand. The mare stood as if made of stone, head bowed, a living absence. Wyatt's own voice startled him. 100. Heads turned. Hank Miller, his longtime stable manager, shot him a look of disbelief from across the crowd. The auctioneer blinked, surprised by the sudden leap. 100. Do I hear 150? A man in a battered hat half-heartedly raised a finger. Wyatt responded without pause. 200. Now the air in the barn seemed to charge, the hush turning prickly. Hank's eyes pleaded, "Don't do this. Don't drag another lost soul home." Wyatt ignored him. The bids climbed, awkward and reluctant. He outbid them all, his voice crisp, steady, determined. A man buying a second chance, not just a horse. "Sold. $2,000. To the gentleman in the back." A hush swept the barn. Wyatt didn't move, didn't smile, didn't acknowledge the ripple of murmurs. He walked forward, boots echoing on splintered planks, as the stable boy handed over the rope. The boy's fingers lingered on the mare's mane. Wyatt noticed the fear in the boy's eyes, not for himself, but for the horse. Wyatt felt something stir and twist inside him. He met the mare's gaze. Her eyes were flat, almost lifeless. But beneath the emptiness, he caught a flicker, a faint, stubborn ember refusing to die out. He let out a shaky breath, so quiet no one heard. Wyatt led Angel. He named her that on instinct, silently, privately, through the gauntlet of onlookers. Each step away from the auction block felt like moving through molasses. He was aware suddenly of the burden pressing on his chest. Not just the mare's future, but the weight of every past failure, Every moment he'd chosen safety over feeling. Rain began to fall in earnest, drumming on the roof as they reached his trailer. Angel hesitated at the ramp, trembling, her breath ragged. Wyatt waited. He didn't coax or threaten. He simply stood, quiet, patient, letting the rain soak his hair, his suit, his bones. After a long, fragile moment, Angel stepped forward. The first step was small, barely more than a shuffle, but it was enough. He closed the trailer doors behind her and leaned against the metal, eyes shut. The world outside washed in the hush of rain. For the first time in years, Wyatt felt the old ache loosen, just a fraction. He hadn't come here to save anyone. But maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to save himself, to right the wrongs he'd carried so long that he'd forgotten what hope even felt like. Inside the trailer, Angel stood in silence as if holding her breath. Wyatt touched his palm to the cold steel. "I don't know if I can fix you," he whispered, "but I promise I won't turn away this time." Lightning split the sky outside, illuminating the lonely figure and the haunted man, both beginning a journey neither could yet imagine. The wheels of Wyatt's trailer splashed through mud as he pulled into the long drive of St. James Ranch. The ranch sprawled out beneath an iron-gray sky, fields of golden grass trembling in the wind, a cluster of modern barns and stables set against the wild, ragged line of distant Rockies. The place had always felt too big, too empty, echoing with more memories than laughter. As Wyatt stepped down, the rain drumming his shoulders, his staff gathered under the covered breezeway, eyes curious, some concerned, others already skeptical. At the front stood Hank Miller, the ranch's stable manager, with his arms folded across his chest, jaw tight. Hank was as much a fixture here as the ancient barn itself, a man who could read horses better than most people, but never hesitated to speak his mind. Wyatt opened the trailer door. Angel stood motionless, her eyes fixed on nothing, body rigid, breath shallow. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking of raindrops off the metal roof. "What's this?" Hank's voice was low, more disappointment than accusation. "Wyatt, you can't be serious." Wyatt didn't answer. Instead, he clipped a lead to Angel's halter, speaking so softly only she could hear. "Easy now. Just a few more steps." The words weren't for comfort. They were a promise, a fragile thread to keep her moving. Angel's legs shook as she stepped onto the ramp, then out into the gray morning. Her coat was a patchwork of dried mud and old scars. Flies buzzed at her wounds. Someone muttered, "She's not worth the feed." And another voice, sharper, "Why'd he bring home another lost cause?" Wyatt ignored them. He walked slow, steady, leading Angel through the puddled courtyard and into a waiting stall. She moved as if underwater, each step reluctant, her head low and ears pinned back. Inside the stall, Wyatt unclipped the rope and waited. Angel stood rooted, back to the world, unmoving. The others gathered at the doorway, peering in, curiosity edged with judgment. Hank was the first to break the silence. "You remember what happened last time, Wyatt?" His tone was warning, but beneath it something else. An old, unspoken grief. "You can't save them all. Sometimes you end up doing more harm." Wyatt's jaw clenched. "I know what I'm doing, Hank." Hank snorted softly, not unkindly. "No, you don't. Not with this one." Wyatt lingered as the others drifted away, leaving only the sound of Angel's shallow breaths and the distant call of a hawk riding the wind. He watched her for a long time, the memories of childhood failure swirling beneath the surface. He was afraid he'd brought home a ghost he couldn't heal, afraid he'd fail her like he had before. Night fell hard and fast over the plains. The wind whipped through the empty corridors, rattling loose tin and making the barn groan. Wyatt brought Angel a bucket of grain and a flake of alfalfa, setting them inside the stall with deliberate care. She didn't move, didn't even flick an ear. Hours passed. Wyatt returned again and again, each time finding Angel just as he'd left her. Still, eyes distant, refusing food, refusing water. Outside, the storm grew wild, thunder rolling in sheets across the land, rain battering the roof. Near midnight, Hank found Wyatt still at the barn. "She's not going to eat," Hank said quietly. "You should get some rest." Wyatt shook his head. "I can't leave her alone." But even his presence seemed to do nothing. At some point, Hank left a dry blanket for Wyatt, a silent gesture of loyalty despite his doubts. Then, as lightning carved the sky, Wyatt saw movement. Angel staggered out into the paddock, into the teeth of the storm. She stood, head bowed, rain lashing her flanks, utterly motionless. She looked less like a living creature than a statue of loss. Wyatt felt a twist of anger, not at her, but at fate, at the years of abuse she'd suffered, at his own helplessness. He knew what the staff would say. She's hopeless. Better to let her go. But something inside him broke. He stepped into the rain, boots sinking into black mud, suit already ruined, dignity forgotten. Step by step, he crossed the paddock and stood beside her, the storm soaking them both. Wyatt didn't speak. He simply stood there, sharing her loneliness, letting the wind and rain strip away every pretense, every mask. Angel's eyes shifted, just barely, acknowledging him. In that moment, he surrendered all pride, all control, choosing to stay with her in the mud, to sit with her pain instead of turning away. It wasn't heroic. It was desperate, raw, but for the first time since he was a boy, Wyatt stopped running from the grief that lived inside him. The ranch lights flickered behind him. The storm raged on. Somewhere in the darkness, hope took its first trembling breath. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the ranch shrouded in a heavy silence. The air washed clean but heavy with the scent of wet earth and the subtle ache of something unresolved. Wyatt awoke stiff and chilled from his makeshift vigil beside Angel. He had slept, if you could call it that, in intervals of minutes, his back pressed against the stall wall, rainwater crusted to his skin and suit alike. He watched Angel as she stood in the gray light, her eyes open, body motionless except for the faintest quiver in her flanks. It wasn't progress, but it wasn't defeat either. When he reached out, his hand hovered over her mane. For a moment, Angel tensed, her breath hitching. But then, so subtly he nearly missed it. She leaned her weight against him, barely a whisper of trust, but real. Wyatt held still, letting the moment stretch, something unfamiliar flickering in his chest. It was more than a physical gesture. It was a crack in the wall both had built around themselves. The barn's side door opened with a groan. Hank's boots squelched on the wet ground as he peeked in. His eyes widened at the sight. Wyatt, muddy and disheveled, sitting on the stall floor. "You look like hell," Hank muttered, but his tone was gentler than before. "She move at all?" Wyatt nodded once, afraid to say more and break the spell. For a minute, the two men stood in silence, the weight of the night passing between them. As the morning sun broke through the clouds, Wyatt realized he couldn't do this alone. The memory of every failed attempt, every horse he hadn't been able to help, pressed down on him. He knew Angel needed more than just his stubborn presence. She needed hope, expertise, maybe even miracles. He took out his phone, hands trembling, and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. When the voice answered, calm, measured, slightly amused, he felt a rush of relief and dread. Dr. Emily Carter, trauma specialist. I'm assuming this isn't a social call, Wyatt. He managed a dry laugh. No, it's not. I've got a Mustang mare. Bad shape. She's given up. Emily didn't hesitate. Can she stand? She's standing, but not much else. Any sign of aggression? No, she's just absent. Keep her hydrated. Don't force food yet. I'll be there by noon. She hung up before Wyatt could thank her. When Emily arrived, she brought with her a quiet authority that filled the stable. She was in her late 30s, tall and lean, hair pulled into a neat ponytail, eyes keen and direct. She radiated competence and, more importantly, a kind of unspoken empathy that seemed to reach animals before she even touched them. Wyatt introduced her to Angel with a nod. Emily observed the mare carefully, saying nothing for a long while. She moved slowly, kneeling just outside the stall's reach, letting Angel get used to her presence. Every movement was deliberate, her breathing slow and visible. She didn't try to touch Angel. Instead, she sat in the straw, her posture relaxed, reading a veterinary journal, speaking occasionally in a low, melodic voice, never directly to Angel, but always within earshot. Wyatt hovered, anxious, unsure if he should stay or leave. Finally, Emily glanced at him. You want her to trust you, Wyatt. You've got to give her space. Sometimes, presence is enough. He bristled, old habits flaring. I've tried everything. She won't eat, won't drink. I sat with her all night. Emily's eyes softened, but her words remained firm. You can't force healing, not for horses, not for people. Wyatt felt the sting of that truth. He looked away, anger and shame flickering inside him. Progress isn't a straight line, Emily continued. For now, we celebrate the small things. That she's upright, that she let you stay. It means something. Angel flicked an ear at Emily's voice, a minute acknowledgement. As the day wore on, Emily and Wyatt settled into a quiet rhythm. They kept their voices low, minimized sudden movements, and waited. Hours passed, punctuated only by the sound of birds in the eaves, the soft scrape of hooves on straw. Once, Emily reached into her bag and sprinkled a handful of sweet hay just beyond Angel's reach, not close enough to pressure her, but close enough to tempt curiosity. Angel ignored it at first, but as dusk fell, she stretched her neck, sniffing the hay with tentative interest, before retreating again. Emily smiled, small but genuine. That's a start, she said, and Wyatt felt a tiny surge of hope. In the days that followed, Emily made herself a fixture at the ranch, dividing her time between observation and gentle intervention. She showed Wyatt how to offer water in a shallow pan, how to avoid eye contact so Angel wouldn't feel challenged, how to move and breathe so that every gesture spoke of patience, not urgency. At night, Wyatt found himself thinking not just about Angel, but about the invisible walls he'd built around his own heart. The silence of the ranch, once comforting, now felt like a mirror, reflecting his isolation, his longing for connection, and his fear of being vulnerable. One evening, as the sun set and shadows stretched long across the paddock, Wyatt lingered outside Angel's stall. He watched Emily gently brush the dust from Angel's coat, never forcing, always waiting for permission. For the first time, he realized, maybe the rescue wasn't only for Angel. Maybe through her, he might finally find the courage to rescue himself. A shift had begun, almost imperceptible. A flicker of hope, frail but growing, had taken root in the hard Colorado soil. The days stretched out in the slow, golden hush of early autumn. Wind whispered through the fields, scattering brittle leaves across the ranch yard. Every morning, the air tasted faintly of frost and wild grass. Inside the stable, time moved even slower, measured by the rhythm of breath and the shifting shafts of sunlight on dust. Wyatt kept vigil beside Angel's stall. His world condensed to the narrow space where hope was tested, faltered, and quietly, stubbornly, refused to die. Each day brought no dramatic changes, only the smallest signs: a blink, a shifting hoof, the slight widening of nostrils at the scent of a new morning. Emily's presence became a constant, as essential as the sun's slow passage. She moved quietly around the barn, never rushing, never raising her voice, her calm forming a shield against the anxious energy of the staff. Hank watched from a distance, sometimes with skepticism, sometimes with the weary understanding of a man who had seen too much disappointment to hope too easily. Inside Angel's stall, every detail was amplified by silence: the sharp crunch of straw under boots, the soft hiss of a water pan as it was set down, the wet, animal warmth of breath in the chilly air. Emily often simply sat cross-legged in the straw, reading a paperback novel aloud in a gentle murmur, her words floating, soothing. She never demanded Angel's attention, but sometimes Angel would turn one ear, as if straining to understand the music of human speech. Wyatt's nights were restless. He found himself pacing the ranch in the darkness, haunted by old ghosts, tracing the outlines of memory and regret. In the kitchen at 3 a.m., he'd pour black coffee, listening to the ticking of the clock and the distant stamp of hooves. It was a rhythm he couldn't escape, the ache of unfinished business, the silence of wounds that never quite closed. Sometimes, in the soft gray of dawn, he'd find himself at Angel's stall before anyone else. He'd lean on the rail, feeling the roughness of old wood under his fingers, watching Angel as she slept standing up, her eyes flickering beneath half-lowered lids. She looked fragile, lost in some place beyond pain, but in those quiet hours, Wyatt began to sense a presence, a thread of connection that grew stronger the longer he waited. Angel was slow to respond, but she was not completely absent. Some mornings, she'd give a deep, almost imperceptible snort when Wyatt entered, a sound so small it might have been overlooked by anyone who didn't know the language of loss. Other times, when Emily refilled her water, Angel would flick her ear, a sign she registered the kindness, even if she couldn't accept it yet. Wyatt measured progress in moments that might have seemed invisible to an outsider. The day Angel finally nudged at the hay with her nose, pushing it across the stall, not eating but interacting with the world, Wyatt felt something flutter in his chest. Relief, mingled with awe. Emily watched him, understanding more than she said. Healing isn't about speed, Wyatt. It's about presence, about being willing to wait with her in the dark, without demanding anything in return. He nodded, swallowing hard. Sometimes I think she's never going to come back. Emily's gaze was steady. Sometimes it feels that way, but she's still here, so are you. Their partnership grew in the quiet, unhurried hours. They shared small rituals, feeding Angel by hand, walking the fence line at sunset, sharing stories in low voices while Angel dozed. The staff, once skeptical, now grew quietly supportive. Their footsteps softer, their voices respectful in the presence of struggle. Wyatt's own world began to shift. The walls he'd built around himself, walls of business, money, pride, felt thinner in the hush of the stable. He realized sometimes with a jolt of fear, sometimes with a painful gratitude. How much of his life had been spent in isolation, circling his wounds. Angel's silence became a mirror, reflecting the emptiness he'd carried for so long. One night, a heavy wind rattled the barn, carrying with it the distant call of coyotes and the faraway thunder of a gathering storm. Wyatt lay awake on a cot just outside Angel's stall. He listened to the rhythm of her breathing, the quiet shifting of her weight. Suddenly, he felt her muzzle touch his hand through the rails, a soft, searching gesture. He didn't move, hardly breathed, afraid to disturb the fragile trust. The gesture passed as quickly as it came, but it stayed with him, warming him long after the barn had grown cold again. Emily noticed the change, too. "She's starting to see you, Wyatt," she said one morning, her voice low, almost reverent. "Maybe it's time to start seeing yourself, too. Not as a man who failed, but as someone who stayed." The days became a meditation. Patience was not a gift Wyatt had ever possessed, but Angel demanded it from him, and he gave it again and again, learning the art of waiting, the strength of presence. He began to understand that love, real love, was not an act of rescue, but of companionship in the silent, uncertain places. That healing could be found not in fixing what was broken, but in standing with the brokenness and refusing to turn away. As the autumn sun sank behind the mountains, Angel stood a little taller, her coat catching the last light, and Wyatt, for the first time in years, felt less alone. Long after the ranch had settled into its evening hush, Wyatt remained in the shadows of the stable, tracing the outline of Angel's stall door with restless hands. Moonlight bled through the rafters, pooling in pale patches on the straw. The autumn air was sharp, scented with the memory of rain and old hay. The world outside felt impossibly far away. Angel stood quietly, eyes half-lidded, but Wyatt sensed she was awake, listening, aware in that peculiar way of horses who have learned to survive by reading the silence of those around them. Her presence anchored him, held him to the present, even as his thoughts were swept backward through time. The old guilt returned most powerfully at night. In the darkness, memory had a way of becoming physical. He saw again the barn from his childhood, the paint peeling from the door, the smoke roiling into the blue Colorado sky. Heard again his own thin voice crying for help, the sound swallowed by flames and by his father's blunt refusal to risk more than could be replaced. The horse, a gentle gray gelding named Jasper, had been more friend than animal. Wyatt had been the only one who cared enough to try. In the end, his hands had been too small, his courage too late. Wyatt's breath caught. He pressed a fist to his chest, as if he could keep his heart from falling apart. He'd spent decades turning away from that pain, burying it under money, work, reputation. But in Angel's wounded eyes, he saw it all returned. The abandonment, the longing, the question that haunted them both. Why had no one come sooner? Why had no one fought harder to save what mattered? He didn't notice Emily at first. She stood at the barn's entrance, wrapped in an old denim jacket, the glow from her phone illuminating her face in the gloom. She waited, watching until he looked up. "You're chasing ghosts tonight," she said quietly. Wyatt tried to muster a smile, failed. "I don't know how to let them go." Emily stepped into the soft light, the straw crunching beneath her boots. "Maybe you're not supposed to let go. Maybe you're supposed to listen to them, and then do something different this time." He wanted to protest, to argue, but her words cut too close to truth. Instead, he nodded and returned his gaze to Angel, who watched them both with those old, knowing eyes. Later, as the barn slipped toward midnight, Angel lifted her head and took a slow, cautious step toward the stall door. Her muzzle brushed the edge of Wyatt's hand, light as a moth's wing, but deliberate, searching. Wyatt froze, his breath suspended. The touch lingered, carrying a question as old as grief. "Are you still here?" He answered in the only way he knew how. He let her stay. He opened his hand, palm up, making himself small, vulnerable, just as she was. For a moment, time stopped, and all the sorrow and hope in the world passed through that fragile contact. Emily watched from a few feet away, her expression softened by understanding. "She's letting you in, Wyatt. That's not nothing." Wyatt swallowed hard, fighting the urge to speak. Words felt too big, too crude for what was happening. Instead, he closed his eyes, letting the sensation of Angel's breath on his skin ground him. For the first time, the barn didn't feel haunted. It felt sacred. In the following days, the rhythm of healing grew more tangible. Angel still moved carefully, but now she'd nudge Wyatt's arm when he entered, accepting a few mouthfuls of hay from his palm. Emily watched their interactions with a gentle distance, offering guidance when needed, but always reminding Wyatt not to rush what could not be hurried. One afternoon, as the sun painted long stripes of gold through the stable, Emily found Wyatt lost in thought, staring out across the pasture. "You're holding on so tight, Wyatt. What would happen if you let go just a little?" He shook his head. "If I let go, I'm afraid I'll lose her. Or myself." Emily placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "Letting go isn't the same as giving up. Sometimes it's trusting the process, trusting her, trusting yourself." Her words unsettled him, yet they settled inside him like seeds. That evening, Wyatt returned to the stall and simply sat. No agenda, no expectation. He listened to Angel's breathing, matched his own to hers. Let the silence speak for both of them. And then, as dusk gathered and the world grew still, Angel pressed her nose against his hand once more. This time a little longer, a little braver. Wyatt felt a warmth spread through him, loosening knots that had lived in his chest for years. He realized something then. Angel's journey wasn't so different from his own. Both had been shaped by wounds, by losses no one else could see. Both carried scars that had made them wary, silent, guarded. But both were learning, in the slow language of patience and presence, how to begin again. Emily stood nearby, eyes shining with quiet pride. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. Her role was to hold the space, to nudge Wyatt toward letting go of control and allowing healing to unfold in its own imperfect way. That night, as Wyatt lay awake in the darkness, the echoes of the past seemed less sharp, less threatening. He understood now that forgiveness wasn't about erasing what had happened. It was about making room for something new to grow alongside the old pain, a tender shoot of hope, pressing upward through the hard ground. Angel, once little more than a ghost, now leaned into his touch, and Wyatt, learning to embrace uncertainty, found that presence and love, quiet, steady, unwavering, could be enough. It began as a quiet morning, the kind that hints at peace but harbors trouble just beneath the surface. Dew glistened on the prairie grass, and a fine, hopeful mist drifted over the paddocks as Wyatt carried a bucket of oats to Angel's stall. She met him at the rail, her nose nudging his palm with a familiarity that felt like a gift, hard-won and precious. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed that hope was finally taking root. Emily was already at the ranch, standing with her stethoscope pressed lightly against Angel's side, her brow furrowed in concentration. The staff moved quietly in the background, mindful not to disturb the fragile peace inside the stable. Wyatt set the bucket down, watching Emily's face. She was usually quick to share any progress or setbacks, but now her silence lingered. He felt a chill settle into his bones. "What is it?" he asked, voice tight. Emily stepped back, lips pressed together, her eyes searching Angel's body from withers to flank. "Wyatt, has she put on any weight since you brought her here?" He shook his head. "A little, maybe. She's eating better, but she's still thin." "Why?" Emily hesitated, then motioned Wyatt closer. "I want you to feel something." She guided his hand to Angel's belly, tracing gently along the mare's underside. Wyatt's fingers froze as he detected a subtle, unfamiliar movement. A flutter, deep and unmistakable. "She's pregnant," Emily said softly, her voice threading tension through the air. "And not far from foaling, if I'm right." Wyatt's mind reeled. "That's not possible. She looked half dead at the auction." Emily's face was grave. "She's been fighting for more than just herself. And now, so are we." The implications hit hard. The risks multiplied. A pregnant, traumatized mare was already a precarious situation, but Angel's depleted state made the odds even longer. Emily explained what could go wrong: premature labor, complications from malnutrition, the real possibility that neither Angel nor her unborn foal might survive. Fear tangled with urgency in Wyatt's gut. He paced the length of the stable, mind whirring. "What do we do?" Emily's professionalism became razor sharp. "We do everything we can. I'll adjust her feed, monitor her around the clock. She needs rest, calm, and as much nutrition as she'll accept. But above all, she needs us not to lose hope, even if things get ugly." As news spread through the ranch, the staff's skepticism was replaced with a stunned sort of reverence. For the first time, everyone understood. This wasn't just about saving a broken Mustang. This was about the future, the chance for new life, the possibility of a miracle on this hard, lonely land. Angel grew more restless as the days passed. Her sides heaved, sweat slicking her coat even in the cool air. Some nights she circled her stall endlessly. Other times she stood frozen, shivering with a fear too deep for words. One evening, a staff member rushed into the main house. "Angel's down. She's rolling, thrashing." Wyatt and Emily sprinted to the barn, hearts pounding. Inside, Angel was on the ground, her body racked by violent spasms. The colic had come on fast and hard, a twisting of the gut that could be deadly, especially for a mare in her condition. Time seemed to warp. Every second mattered. "Get her up," Emily barked. Wyatt and Hank heaved at Angel's halter, pleading, coaxing, finally getting her to her feet. Emily kept her moving, walking her in slow circles, refusing to let her lie down again. The hours blurred into a single, desperate battle. Angel's breathing labored, her eyes wild with panic and pain. Wyatt's voice grew hoarse as he urged her on. "Come on, girl. Stay with me. Don't quit on us now." Emily administered pain relief, her hands steady even as sweat trickled down her brow. Hank fetched blankets, water, a constant flow of supplies and comfort. The rest of the ranch faded away. There was only this fight, this midnight struggle, hope balanced on the edge of a knife. All night they circled the barn, walking Angel through agony, whispering every prayer and promise they knew. Sometimes Angel staggered, threatening to collapse. Each time Wyatt was there, catching her weight, refusing to let her fall. By dawn, Angel's breathing eased. Her legs trembled but held. The crisis, for now, had passed. Exhausted, Emily slumped against the wall, rubbing her temples. She made it through, she murmured, more to herself than anyone. Wyatt knelt beside Angel, stroking her sweat-dampened neck. For the first time, she turned and rested her head against his chest, letting her weight sink into him. He closed his eyes, feeling her heart thunder beneath her ribs, a wild, terrified, stubborn thing, but still alive. In that moment, the distance between man and horse disappeared. Wyatt realized that fighting for Angel, fighting for her unborn foal, had become more than a duty, more than atonement. It was love, fierce and unconditional, the kind that stayed up all night in the mud, that risked heartbreak rather than give up. Emily rose, placing a steadying hand on Wyatt's shoulder. She's not out of the woods, neither are we, but tonight she fought, and so did you. As the first rays of sun cut through the haze, painting the world gold, Wyatt looked at Angel and saw something he'd almost forgotten how to recognize. Hope, battered but unbroken, shining through the wounds and the weariness. There would be more nights like this, more battles to come. But in that quiet dawn, surrounded by the scent of hay and sweat and survival, the ranch felt less lonely, less haunted by old failures. For the first time in years, Wyatt believed that second chances, real, hard-won, miraculous, might just be possible. The air in the stable turned raw as October's first frost crept across the land, sharpening every edge of grass, painting the world in silver and blue. The ranch had fallen quiet, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. All day, Emily watched Angel's every movement, making notes in the margin of her weathered ledger, her face unreadable but her hands never still. Wyatt barely left the stable. He walked the stall in soft circles, boots scuffing the straw, as Angel's breathing grew shallower, her eyes shadowed and distant. Her sides heaved with the weight of new life and old exhaustion. In her moments of stillness, she would press her head gently into Wyatt's chest, seeking comfort, reassurance, something even she could not name. Wyatt gave her what he could. Presence, hands steady and warm, the soft promise of, "I'm here, I won't leave." As dusk fell, a hush settled over the barn, so deep that even the horses in neighboring stalls seemed to sense the gathering storm. Emily stepped quietly to Wyatt's side. "It's time," she said, her voice low, more prayer than command. The foaling had begun. Wyatt's heart hammered as Angel's legs buckled. He eased her to her side in the thick straw, cradling her head as Emily donned gloves and snapped on a headlamp. The air was sharp with the tang of iodine and the metallic scent of fear. The first hours passed in a blur of whispered instructions, shallow breathing, the creak and snap of wood as Angel strained against the pain. Sweat foamed along her neck, her eyes rolling, nostrils flared in silent panic. Wyatt stayed by her head, stroking her muzzle, murmuring broken phrases, words he never imagined he'd say, stripped of pride and armor. At first, the foal's forelegs appeared, wet and trembling, impossibly small. But progress halted. Emily's calm fractured as she realized the foal was stuck, shoulders wedged, the birth canal too tight. The risk of losing both mare and foal had become real, imminent. Wyatt's old terror returned, sharper than before. He remembered Jasper, remembered running for help that never came, remembered the awful sound of silence after the flames. Now, fate had delivered him to the same precipice, the helplessness of a boy, now inside the body of a man. Emily's voice was suddenly sharp. "Wyatt, I need your hands." Hold her steady. Don't let her thrash. He knelt, grasping Angel's head, whispering every promise he could find in the wreckage of his heart. Angel's eyes locked on his, wide, wild, searching. The room narrowed to a single thread of existence, the trembling of his hands, the rise and fall of Angel's chest, Emily's urgent movements. Emily worked her arm carefully inside, searching for the foal's head, twisting, pulling, her forehead beaded with sweat. Every second was an eternity. Wyatt could feel Angel weakening, her energy fading, the slow, terrifying slide toward surrender. A moment came when it seemed all hope had slipped away. Angel's head sagged in Wyatt's lap, her breaths growing faint. Emily's hands shook, her voice fraying. "She's not going to make it unless—" Wyatt interrupted. His voice raw, desperate. "No, don't let go, please, not now." It was not a command, but a plea, offered to Emily, to Angel, to the universe itself. Emily's eyes flashed, and she made one final risky maneuver, grasping the foal's legs, bracing her feet against the straw, and pulling with every ounce of strength. Angel gave a final, shuddering push, her body arching in pain and defiance. With a wet gasp, the foal slipped free, landing in a limp, motionless heap in the straw. For a moment, time froze. No one breathed. The barn was silent except for the ragged rush of Angel's breath. The foal lay unmoving, slick with afterbirth, its small chest still. Wyatt felt something in him break. "No, no, no, please." He moved on instinct, rubbing the foal's chest with a towel, clearing the nose, willing life into that fragile, silent body. Emily knelt beside him, her hands steady, her face tight with fear and hope. Together they worked, refusing to accept the stillness, refusing to let death have the final word. And then, with a faint, shuddering gasp, the foal's ribs expanded. It coughed, kicked once, then again, suddenly wild with life, a miracle in the straw. Angel lifted her head weakly, nose trembling as she nudged her foal, coaxing it upright with maternal urgency that was both fierce and gentle. Wyatt blinked, tears blurring his vision. The world came rushing back in, sounds, smells, color. Emily leaned back, exhausted, her relief unspoken but written across her face. For a few precious minutes, the world was nothing but the three of them, man, mare, and foal, linked by a bond forged in terror and faith. Angel's eyes, so long hollow, now glistened with a new light. Her foal, alive against all odds, pressed close to her side. Emily spoke quietly, voice hoarse with gratitude. "You did it. She did it. They're both here." Wyatt sat back, the tension draining from his body. He cradled Angel's head, feeling her heartbeat against his palm, strong and steady. The barn, which had witnessed so much sorrow, now held the hush of grace. In that fragile dawn, Wyatt understood. True rescue meant standing at the edge of life and death, refusing to surrender hope, and loving so fiercely that the world itself seemed to shift. The foal struggled to its feet, wobbly but determined. Angel nuzzled it, her strength renewed, and Wyatt, humbled, changed, and whole in a way he had never known, let himself feel the fullness of the moment, tears and all. They had survived, and with survival came the promise of something more: redemption, renewal, and the possibility that even the most broken things could be made new. When the night's ordeal faded into the pale light of morning, the barn felt different, as if every beam and every worn plank had drawn in the memory of survival. Exhaustion hung in the air, but so did a fragile, swelling joy. The stable, so long a place of worry and waiting, was now hallowed by the presence of new life. Angel's transformation was almost immediate. Her coat, once dull and matted, seemed to catch the light in a way it never had before. Her eyes, which had reflected only defeat for so long, now glimmered with alertness and quiet pride. She stood protectively over her foal, a filly with a wild blaze on her face and legs like willow switches, already eager to stand and wobble on uncertain feet. The staff, drawn by the miracle, gathered outside the stall, watching in respectful silence. Wyatt lingered in the background, shoulders hunched by fatigue and disbelief. He watched Angel nuzzle her foal, coaxing it to nurse. It seemed impossible that just hours before, he had been begging the universe for a miracle, prepared to lose them both. Now, as the filly found her mother's milk and suckled hungrily, Wyatt felt the last vestiges of his armor drop away. For the first time in years, gratitude filled him more completely than regret. Emily, leaning against the stall rail, caught Wyatt's eye. The look they shared was wordless, equal parts relief, pride, and humility. There was an unspoken understanding that what had happened in the barn would change them both. For Emily, it was another chapter in her long history of patience and hard-won victories. For Wyatt, it was a turning point. The moment his journey became not just about saving Angel, but about learning to risk his heart again. In the quiet that followed, the ranch seemed to breathe more deeply. Even the staff, once cynical and weary, moved through their chores with a new gentleness. Hank, who had doubted the sense of Wyatt's decision from the start, left an extra flake of alfalfa by Angel's stall without a word, his gruff exterior softened by the sight of the mare standing guard over her foal. That afternoon, Wyatt sat on a bale of straw just outside the stall, lost in thought. Emily joined him, their silence companionable. She studied the filly as it staggered, fell, and rose again, determination in every tremble of muscle. "She's got fight in her," Emily murmured. "So does her mother." Wyatt nodded, watching Angel as she carefully nudged the filly upright. "I never really understood what it meant to rescue something," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "I always thought it was about being strong, about fixing what was broken. But it's not. It's about staying, about being present, even when you're powerless." Emily glanced at him, her eyes kind. "That's the real cost of healing. It asks everything of you: patience, humility, hope, even when there's no guarantee. Sometimes all you can do is show up over and over and let them know they're not alone." He considered this, the lesson sinking in. For so long, Wyatt's life had been a string of transactions, risks measured, outcomes calculated, losses quickly buried. But this, sitting with suffering, refusing to give up even when hope was threadbare, was something deeper. It was a way of loving that demanded vulnerability and surrender. The ranch itself seemed changed by the ordeal. There was a new sense of camaraderie, a willingness among the staff to see beyond what was visible. They began to notice the small things: a horse's flinch, a worker's weary eyes, a gesture of kindness, and respond with patience instead of impatience, empathy instead of irritation. The story of Angel's survival, whispered in the bunkhouse and kitchen, became a quiet anthem for second chances. Wyatt, once content in his solitude, found himself reaching out more, joining meals, sharing laughter, asking about others' troubles. He walked the fence line at dusk, watching Angel and her foal graze, the simple beauty of their presence stirring something gentle in him. One evening, as the sun spilled gold over the fields, Wyatt stood with Emily at the paddock gate. Angel and her foal, whom Wyatt had named Hope, trotted side by side, the filly's clumsy exuberance a perfect contrast to her mother's steady watchfulness. "I thought I was here to save her," Wyatt said softly. "But maybe I was the one who needed saving." Emily smiled, a hint of pride in her voice. "That's the thing about rescue. It works both ways. Every time you stay, every time you refuse to turn away, you're changed. You learn to love without conditions. And you learn that healing is never just for the one you're trying to save." As dusk settled, a hush fell over the ranch. Wyatt watched Angel nuzzle Hope, their shadows stretching long and peaceful across the prairie. He felt a quiet joy, a certainty that the wounds of the past, though never erased, no longer owned him. In the barn, the other horses seemed calmer, their restlessness eased by the scent of new life and fresh hay. The staff, for all their grumbling, lingered a little longer in the stable that night, drawn by the fragile wonder of what they had witnessed. Wyatt knew the journey wasn't over. There would be setbacks, moments of fear, the possibility of loss. But for the first time, he didn't dread the uncertainty. He was ready to walk alongside it, to trust in the slow, patient work of love. And as the stars blinked awake in the wide Colorado sky, Wyatt whispered a silent vow to stay, to hope, to rescue and be rescued again and again, for as long as it took. The autumn deepened, painting the Colorado plains in swaths of gold and rust. Each day the air grew sharper, laced with the scent of dry leaves and distant wood smoke. At St. James Ranch, life settled into a new, hopeful rhythm. The past weeks seemed to move in slow motion, but now the world spun gently forward, carrying everyone along in the current of quiet change. Angel and her foal, Hope, became fixtures on the landscape. In the early mornings, before frost had melted from the grass, Wyatt would stand by the fence, mug of coffee warming his hands, watching the pair graze side by side. Hope's steps grew steadier, her leaps more daring, her curiosity unending. Angel, vigilant and proud, shadowed her every move, her transformation so complete that the staff sometimes whispered she looked like a different horse altogether. Wyatt felt the transformation within himself, too, though it arrived quietly, in ways that could not always be named. He found himself lingering in the barn after chores, rubbing Hope's fuzzy head, talking in a low voice to Angel about the worries he once hid from the world. He no longer felt the old emptiness gnawing at his chest. Where regret had lived, there was now something softer, acceptance, even gratitude for what he had survived. But the past was not finished with him. It called to Wyatt in dreams and in moments when the wind rattled the barn doors just so, summoning up old images. The fire, the frantic whinnying, his father's face half lit by flames. The guilt, the sense that he'd failed, that he was doomed to repeat that failure, still cast its shadow. One cold Sunday, as Angel and Hope dozed in the straw, Wyatt made a decision. He pulled on his oldest coat, grabbed a spade from the tool room, and walked out past the paddocks toward a stand of cottonwoods that marked the farthest edge of the property. The grass was high here, gold and stiff, and the earth beneath it was marked by a single, weathered stone. This was the grave of Jasper, the horse from his boyhood, the one he hadn't been able to save. For years, Wyatt had avoided this place, unable to bear the memories it held. Now, as he knelt by the stone, the sharpness of grief surprised him, but it no longer undid him. Instead, he found himself speaking softly, words tumbling out with the cadence of a confession. "I'm sorry I left you alone," he murmured, voice barely louder than the wind. "I didn't know how to fight for you. I was afraid, and I let that fear decide everything." He let the words settle. Then, for the first time, he allowed himself forgiveness. Not by denying the past, but by embracing it. By understanding that loss is not a sentence, but a lesson. That redemption is not a sudden, blinding light, but the patient work of choosing compassion over and over, even when it hurts. As he stood to leave, a flock of crows burst from the cottonwoods, scattering into the pale sky. Wyatt felt lighter, as if some old weight had been gently lifted from his shoulders. He returned to the barn with a new sense of freedom. The ranch was quieter than usual, the staff away at market, Emily tending to another horse across the property. Wyatt walked to the paddock, whistled softly. Angel trotted over, hope bounding in her wake. There was pride in Angel's stride, a boldness that reminded him of the horse she must have been before pain taught her to hide. Wyatt leaned against the fence, watching as Hope galloped circles around her mother. He realized then that Angel's rescue had never been just about survival. It was about the possibility of joy, about learning to trust the world again, and in doing so, inviting others to trust too. Emily returned at dusk, her hair wind-blown, cheeks pink from the cold. She found Wyatt tending to Angel, his movements unhurried, almost tender. They stood together in the paddock, watching as Hope kicked at a tumbleweed, sending it spinning. "You seem different," Emily said quietly. Wyatt smiled. "I think I am. For a long time, I thought the only way to make up for the past was to keep punishing myself. But Angel, she taught me something else. That you can choose to open your heart, even if you know it could break again." Emily placed a hand on his arm, a gesture that needed no words. They watched as the sun dipped below the horizon, setting the fields aglow. Angel and Hope raced through the golden light, their shadows long and wild. Wyatt felt the walls around his heart. Walls built from shame, fear, and silence finally begin to crumble. He understood at last. Redemption was not about erasing what had come before, but about living fully in spite of it. About loving again, risking again, letting go of control and allowing hope to enter, even if it arrived on shaky legs. As darkness settled, Wyatt closed his eyes and breathed in the peace that comes after a storm has passed. He wasn't alone anymore. Angel, Hope, Emily, the family he had built, not by blood, but by the willingness to stay, to forgive, to begin again. For the first time in his memory, Wyatt believed that the future might hold more than regret, that the past, honored but no longer worshipped, could rest at last. When the ranch lights flickered on, Wyatt, Emily, Angel, and Hope stood together in the paddock, silhouetted against the first stars. 4 survivors, 4 witnesses to the quiet, holy power of second chances. Long after the first snow dusted the ranch in white, Wyatt found himself wandering the pastures at dawn, the air sharp with winter's promise. Angel and Hope grazed nearby, their warm breath swirling in clouds. The world felt both fragile and enduring, a landscape carved by loss and love, every ridge and hollow telling its own story of survival. Wyatt paused at the top of a rise, hands in his pockets, his eyes tracing the lines of fence that marked the boundaries of his land. He watched as the sun spilled gold across the fields, painting everything in a quiet, miraculous light. In that moment, the enormity of all that had happened, every failure, every sleepless night, every risk taken for the sake of a broken horse, rose up and settled around him like a blessing. He realized, finally, that his journey with Angel had never really been about fixing the past. It had been about learning how to stay, how to be present for another living soul in their hour of need, how to offer hope without demanding gratitude or perfection. In saving Angel, he had been saved himself, not through heroics, but through patience, humility, and a stubborn refusal to turn away. That lesson didn't remain locked inside Wyatt's heart. The changes rippled outward, transforming the ranch in ways both subtle and profound. The staff who had once doubted, who had watched from the sidelines with folded arms and guarded eyes, began to see things differently. They tended to the animals with a gentler touch, noticing the smallest signs of distress, learning to wait rather than force. The story of Angel and her foal spread quietly, passed around the supper table, told in the bunkhouse and the tack room, until it became part of the ranch's mythology. Visitors began to arrive, drawn by word of the miracle. They came with stories of their own: a woman whose old dog would no longer eat, a boy who had lost his father and found solace in the company of a neglected pony, an elderly man who'd never forgiven himself for a choice made long ago. Wyatt listened to each one, sharing what he could, sometimes advice, sometimes only the gift of attention and time. He saw how, in the simple act of listening, another kind of rescue occurred. People left the ranch a little lighter, a little less burdened by their own ghosts. And Wyatt, once so certain he had nothing left to give, discovered that compassion was a resource that grew only as it was shared. One crisp morning, standing in the paddock with Emily, Angel, and Hope at his side, Wyatt turned to the small crowd of visitors. He found himself speaking, not as a man of wealth or business, but as someone who had known deep loss, and, through the stubborn work of love, found his way back to hope. Sometimes, saving another life is how we finally save our own, he said. His voice was steady, carrying across the frosted field. It's easy to look at what's broken, in animals, in people, even in ourselves, and believe that it's beyond repair. But I've learned something here on this ranch. You don't have to fix everything. Sometimes, you just have to stay, sit with someone in the mud, wait with them in the dark, refuse to let go, even when hope is hard to find. The crowd was silent, listening. Angel nuzzled Wyatt's arm. Hope pressed against her mother's side. Emily smiled, her eyes reflecting all they had survived together. Wyatt continued. What happened here wasn't a miracle of medicine or strength. It was a miracle of presence, of refusing to turn away from pain, of believing in second chances, even when the world said there were none left. That's a lesson I hope you'll take with you. Look around. See value where others see brokenness. Give what you can, and know that no act of compassion is ever wasted. It always comes back to you in ways you may never expect. He paused, letting the words sink in. The air was bright with possibility, the hush of morning echoing with the promise of redemption. He glanced at Emily, who nodded in encouragement. If this story touched your heart, Wyatt said softly, share it with someone who needs a reminder that second chances are real, for all of us. Tell your story. Let someone else know they aren't alone in the struggle. Because maybe the real strength is learning to sit with someone in the mud, not to fix them, but simply to stay until hope returns. As the crowd drifted back toward the warmth of the ranch house, Wyatt stood quietly beside Angel and Hope. He knew life would bring new challenges, loss, doubt, setbacks that would test everything he had learned. But he was no longer afraid. The walls that had once surrounded his heart were gone, replaced by something far stronger. The willingness to love, to risk, to show up again and again for those who needed him. The snow sparkled in the morning sun. Angel tossed her head, her coat gleaming, her foal bounding in joyful circles. Wyatt smiled, feeling the old ache replaced by a steady, enduring peace. He looked out over his land, at the people and animals now bound to him by story, by struggle, by hope, and he understood, finally, that rescue was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning.